Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. This time talking episode 13 of season 2 of The Flash called Welcome to Earth 2. And man, The Flash has always been a show that really, you know, went out of its way to amp up the level of comic book geekiness um, in comparison to Arrow. And here, this is one where they just absolutely go whole hog with it, and it's great. This is easily one of my absolute favorite episodes of the series so far, and there's just like so many wonderful little details to talk about. So let's just kind of get right into things. Now, it's difficult to talk about all the little Easter eggs that they had in this episode, but I do want to talk about a few that really did jump out at me. Um, Now, I've seen that some people seem to be confused about what's going on with those glimpses of other things that we see. I remember seeing somebody saying that when they were traveling to Earth 2 and they saw things like the Legion flight ring and the 90s Flash and Jonah Hex, that these were all happening on modern day alternators. And I don't think that's quite correct. I think that the Flash is basically alternate reality, time travel. Whenever somebody does something crazy like that, it's just an excuse to sort of show things that from the future, from alternate realities, whatever. So, while it's possible that at some point in the future Barry might time travel back to the Old West and meet Jonah Hex, I think the more simple explanation is that it's been established that he's going to be coming up on Legends of Tomorrow in a few episodes, and this is just sort of a way to sort of throw it out there. Now, the Legion flight ring, well, what that could mean, um, well, Jeff Johns, of course, is one of the main people behind the show, and if I remember correctly, he was the one that wrote the Legion of Superheroes episode of Smallville. Johns is a guy who loves the Legion, and given that the Flash legacy has some very strong ties to the time of the Legion, then the idea of them having members of the Legion of Superheroes travel back to the modern era, like what they did in Smallville, or having Barry go to the future, those are both possibilities that would be on the table. And given that this episode, Joe sort of it's mentioned by Barry's parents, they were like, hey, get to working on some grandkids. Well, that's where Barry's grandchildren were from, was the 30th century. Bart Allen and Jenny Ugnatz, I think is how her last name is pronounced. And as I've mentioned before in my reviews, Jenny is interesting in that if her appearance is that she's obviously a person of mixed race. Her mother is Caucasian and her dad is from, I don't think they ever introduced him in the comics, but by looking at it, you can tell that her dad was obviously a black guy. So, given that what they've done in terms of changing the race for Iris and Joe, well, Iris, I should say, I don't think Joe quite had a counterpart in the comics, but whatever. Um, that would be kind of fitting. Granted, it's 1,000 years in the future, the Legion's time, so that's sort of like 1,000 years. A lot can happen in 1,000 years. Anyway, so there is that. But most likely, if they do bring somebody in from that time period, it would be Bart Allen, the more well-known character. But still, just the idea that they've said, like, yeah, the Legion totally exists in the CW verse in some form somewhere, it is really, really cool. And of course, we get to see those alternate realities and time travel and stuff. We see John Wesley Shipp's 90s Flash, a little glimpse of him, and then of course Melissa Benoist as Supergirl, where it was just confirmed the other week that the Flash will be visiting Supergirl's Earth, and that is something I am massively, massively excited for. That is going to be so, so very cool. Just to see those two characters bounce off of each other. No, in the comics, Supergirl and the Flash, not the most strongly tied characters, but the Flash and the Superman legacy do have a really nice history together, and the episode of Smallville where they introduced Bart, their version of Bart Allen. Again, that's another one of my favorites from that show. So let's just kind of get into things in a little bit more detail. Let's just sort of wrap things up on Earth Prime, or Earth One, I should say. So we're introduced to the villain Geomancer. Um, no, I've never read anything with this guy, so I have nothing to say about him. He just is. Am I the only one who was looking at him and thinking that he looked a little bit like the Winter Soldier from the Marvel movies, though? Um, Now it was cool that the whole revelation thing with Jay about him being the one that created Velocity 6 and this is why I'm dying. It's not that I was losing my speed. That was a really great twist that I did not see coming. And I really like how Caton handles the whole thing. It's like, look, what you didn't have now is that you didn't have then is me, and I'm going to find some way to save you. And eventually, Jay does take a hit of Velocity 7 and goes out and fights Geomancer. And I love how uh, that trick that he did with the hat, that was cool. I've never seen that before. And then, of course, it wears off in the middle of the fight. So yeah, crash and burn for Jay there. But just seeing him out there in the Flash costume again, very very nice, very heroic shot of him when he's like we finally get a reveal of him. Really hoping we can get to see some more of Teddy Shears, with Jay Garrick as the Flash proper. And I'm sure that's something they're saving towards the end of the season. The only thing I didn't like about that scene is, for some unfathomable reason, Joe is the only cop at the scene. Like everybody else left for some reason. And I gotta bring up again that this is a really great example of TV logic. Because you have to think, if this happened in the real world, well, the cops really would have just called in a SWAT team and had a sniper blow Geomancer's head off from a nearby building. The same way I mentioned, like when Heatwave and Captain Cold went on that rampage last season. That's exactly what the cops would have done. But we have to make certain allowances. So let's see. Um, yeah, I think that kind of covers everything going on there. Now, moving on to the stuff with Earth 2. Um, it's a little weird. Now, did I see that correctly? That statue that they had apparently of Jay on Earth 2 with it. I can't really see it very clearly because it was in the background, but it looked like it actually had his real name written on there, which is kind of weird. But okay, whatever. But yeah, apparently the folks in that version of Central City are quite convinced that their Flash is dead. And how hilarious is it that in that world, Leonard Snart is the mayor? Now, of course, there's an alternate reality out there from the comics, rather well known, where instead of becoming Captain Cold, he became Citizen Cold, and the Rogues were actually a group called the Renegades, who were actually cops. And this really ties in very interestingly to the conversation that Snart had with Ray Palmer on Legends of Tomorrow the other week about, Ray said to him, in another life you could have become, like an electrical engineer or something like that. And Snart was like, whatever. In this reality, I'm a survivor, which is what, you need to be if you want to survive this crazy little adventure we're on. So, yeah, here in another reality, Snart apparently took a page out of Oliver Queen's book and ran successfully for mayor. That's a real kick in the pants, I gotta say. I would love to see, our Captain Cold visit Earth 2 and run into his counterpart there. That would be hilarious. And I gotta say, what in the world is up with the Earth 2 newscaster? I mean, this guy looks like somebody who's got like way too into The Fifth Element. Now, don't get me wrong, The Fifth Element is a very good movie, but yeah, and I don't know, that style really wasn't keeping with that 1920s theme that they had going on Earth 2, which is cool. I love that time. I love that Art Deco style. I mean, I think it's just wonderfully beautiful. And I definitely got a big kick out of Earth 2 Barry. Sort of like if Doctor Who had been an American TV show, they would have gotten Grant Gustin to be the 11th Doctor. I mean, that when I look at that, that's all that can go through my mind. But yeah, so we do get a few surprises on Earth 2 in terms of characters that we meet, like Tokamak, here presented as being a really friendly guy. Um, Now there was a production photo that got out on the internet that I happened to stumble across. I make it a point to actively avoid spoilers, but this is one that I just saw by accident, so I knew that Deadshot was going to be on the show. Um, and I wish that hadn't happened because that was a really nice surprise. So nice to see that that actor got to come back one more time. Not entirely clear if Floyd survived that whole situation though. But okay, whatever. Probably not going to be seeing him again one way or the other, given the whole situation with the Suicide Squad movie coming down the pipe, I should say. Let's see what else. um, Nothing really huge to say about Captain Singh's counterpart. That was kind of a nice thing. Now, the whole thing with meeting Cisco's counterpart, that was kind of one of the things on my mind. It's like, okay, we've heard about Deathstorm, we've heard about Killer Frost. Well, what about Cisco? And I was kind of thinking, like, okay, either they're going to introduce an evil, we're going to run into Cisco and he's going to be evil, or we're going to run into, like, Earth 2 Cisco and he's just going to be, like, some enormous loser who's, like, a janitor or something. And I gotta say, they did do a really nice job of introducing Cisco's evil counterpart in the old Hull. I just didn't think they were going to do it this episode, if they were going to do it at all. And then having him be like, "Oh no, those two don't work for Zoom. They work for me. I work for Zoom." Now, the whole thing with his alternate reality parts being named Reverb, I'll let that slide. And from what people have been saying online, that whole bit where they go doppelganger together, apparently that's like a nod to Twin Peaks. Don't know, I never watched that show. But yeah, that was very cool. And I love that bit where Cisco says to Reverb, "Is like, are you trying to Cloud City Vader me?" And that really was a wonderfully Cisco kind of moment. Especially his reaction. I especially loved his reaction to um, like, whoa, I can do that? It was like, yeah, that's pretty in keeping with Vibe's main deal in the comics. And it was also a nice way to explain just how Zoom knew how much that he did. It was like, oh, he had his version of Vibe working for him, who was much, much more in control of his powers than Cisco is. So that was cool. And then Zoom kills him in the same way that, Cisco saw himself die in that alternate reality when he was killed by Reverse Flash, which I mean, damn, that had to be a brown pants moment. Now it was really great to have Robbie Amell come back as Deathstorm. Now visually very different from Deathstorm in the comics, but there are limitations. My only real disappointment here is that once again, Robbie Amell has virtually no lines. Like if you go back and watch the episode where he guest starred at the end of season 1, where they fought Reverse Flash, his lines consist. He has 2 lines that episode that add up to a total of 4 words. No, come on, and which he says to Reverse Flash, and then no problem, which he says to Barry. 4 words. I felt so bad for Robbie Amell watching that. Now here he gets a little bit more, but again, he only has a handful of lines, and then he gets killed off by Zoom. So now this is a comic book show, so they can always do alternate realities, they can always do time travel, they can always do dreams and hallucinations. And they've even said that, like, no, we're still cool with Robbie, and we'd love to have him back on the show whenever we can come up with a story and his schedule permits. And I'm sure Robbie Amell's probably down with that too. But here it's just like, oh, well, so much for that guy. Um, Now, the big thing that they've been playing up here on Earth 2 is, of course, Danielle Pennebaker as Killer Frost, because, well, Danielle Pennebaker is a very pretty lady, and their take on Killer Frost, very nice interpretation, much less fan servicey than the comics, but still very cool, and one that's definitely going to make the fanboys' tongues wag. So, no big surprise that they've been playing that up. But again, nothing really huge in terms of Killer Frost as a character. It's just sort of, oh, it's Caitlyn, but she's evil, and there's not really a whole lot of depth to her. Except towards the end of the episode where we see that she is genuinely scared to death of Zoom, for obviously good reasons, as we see, and having her Ronnie die, obviously tears her up enormously. Oh, and I did like that we did get the sort of name check Martin Stein, and like, and Deathstorm's all like, "Oh, him? Yeah, he's in there. I haven't let him out for years. He doesn't talk much anymore," which kind of implies that on this world, Martin Stein probably was a good person, but he's just spent so much time locked up in the head of a sociopath that he's just like given up trying to have any sort of influence over him, which is pretty creepy, and actually reminds me a lot of the end of Being John Malkovich. You see that the ending of that movie was kind of messed up. I felt really bad for John Malkovich at the end of that movie. Still a good movie though, very good movie. Let me see. Um, oh yeah. Uh, so we do need to talk about the man in the iron mask. I mean, what else can you call that character? That we saw at the end of the episode, and it's really hard not to wonder who that is. I mean, all we can really kind of tell is just looking at the person's skin that they're Caucasian, and probably from the look of it, an older person. Just by the texture of their skin, it looks like that of an older person. Now, there's any number of people that it could be. The two that jump to my mind is somebody who could possibly become Johnny Quick, because Johnny Quick in the comics is Jesse Quick's father. Now, personally, I think it would be really awesome if Earth 2 Harrison Wells became Johnny Quick. That would be seriously cool. But there could be someone else out there, an older person who's also a speedster. That Zoom is also keeping prisoner for the purposes of draining them of their speed. Well, the only person that really leaps to my mind, besides Max Mercury, that actually just popped in my head right this second. And oh my god, how awesome would it be if this was Max Mercury? But and then of course that would be the question of, hey, where's Earth 1 Max Mercury? And I would love to have them do Max Mercury. Max Mercury is a cool character. But anyway, the other possibility, and I know it's a pretty ridiculous one that popped in my mind, is what if it is actually the Flash from the 90s Flash TV show? You know, Killer Frost did mention, I love killing people from other Earths. Not from the other Earth, but the way she says it, using the plural, implies that Zoom has had her deal with people from more than just Earth 1. And wouldn't it be, and it's been said, Zoom wants to be the only speedster in the entire multiverse. So if he were to somehow go to the 90s Flash Earth, capture him, and drag him back to Earth 2 to slowly drain him over time, how nuts would that be? I mean, you'd be able to have John Wesley's ship reveal himself, and Barry would be like, "Dad, like, no, I'm Barry Allen." And hopefully they would give him a moment where once again John Wesley's ship could be Barry Allen, where once again he could be the Flash. Now again, that's just speculation on my part, and I admit I'm really pushing it on that one, but oh man, that would be so darn cool. Let's see. So we also have to talk about Joe and Iris. Nothing really huge to say about Earth 2 Barry. We don't really get to see enough of him to get a huge read on his character, other than that he's an enormous Harrison Wells fanboy. Now, I did like how there was this real tension between Joe and Barry, and we don't really get to see it. It's not made 100% clear how much of this animosity is genuine and how much it is just their interpretation of it. But it is heavily implied that Barry really does not care for Joe at all. And of course, Joe kind of more or less accuses Barry of romancing Iris to sort of use her police whatevers for college in order to get his CSI degree. Which, Given that Barry is the son of a doctor, I mean, assuming Henry Allen is of Earth One is also a doctor. Um, if your dad's a doctor, usually paying for college is not that much of an issue. So Joe's accusation seems a little fishy to me, but we don't have enough information to really judge. But I did really like what they did with Iris. Now remember, they did say early part of season one that she had actually wanted to follow in Joe's footsteps and become a cop, but Joe basically put his foot down on that and pushed Iris in other directions, which is how she ended up in the newspaper. Here, Iris does mention that she did work at the newspaper briefly, but she ended up becoming a cop. Now, I don't think they ever really clearly said if Joe had ever been a police officer at one point, but here we just see them as a singer. Them obviously playing up on Jesse L. Martin's real life talent as a singer. From what I read somewhere, it was even mentioned that he was doing stuff on Broadway when he got offered the role in The Flash. Um, and that was really awesome. Although I do have to say I had heard that they were also considering Ernie Hudson for the role of Joe, and I love Jesse L. Martin as Joe. He's a fantastic choice, but I can't say that there isn't a little part of me that wishes the part had gone to Ernie Hudson, just because I mean, he's a great actor, and yeah, the movie Ghostbusters has tremendous, tremendous. Um, it has a tremendous place in my heart. I love Ghostbusters. But anyway, um, and of course, you're going to take this sort of opportunity to kill off a character because, hey, why not? I mean, that's what alternate reality stories are for a lot of the time. And it can get pretty damn gratuitous. One of my favorite examples was JLA The Nail, where we got to see an alternate reality where the Justice League and all that stuff formed, but without Superman, and that ended up with the Joker just slaughtering Batgirl and Robin while Batman like cried and begged him not to, and I was just like, ah, oh, come on, really? And then, of course, at the end of that story, we find out, well, yeah, that that alien ship did land on Earth, and you know that Kal-El was found and adopted and raised by somebody, but it just wasn't the Kents. And what they do with that at the end of that story is actually quite nice. It's a very clever twist. Anyway, so la di da di da. Let's see. Is there anything else I need to talk about? Um, well, the main thing going on there, besides the whole tension between Barry and Joe, is of course, this is another knife in the heart for Barry. Here he sees, like, hey, this is a reality where things between Iris and I worked out. And this is right after that conversation he had with his Iris about how, like, look, I'm not running away from this. I'm happy with where I am with my life here, even though, yeah, I did just lose Patty. But, still, that whole seeing the reality where this Barry got what he had always wanted. Person he'd been in love with since he was a kid. Man, that has to be a real kick in the gut. So what's going to happen when Earth 2 Iris finds out about what's going on there? Yeah, that's going to be pretty interesting. And yeah, that's kind of everything I had to say about this episode, guys. I mean, it was just good. I mean, it was really just everything I could really ask for in a story like this done live action. And I'm going to call it here. As always, please comment, rate, subscribe. Of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi, and you can also join me on Tumblr at Jedi Reviewer. Till next time, take care and have a good one.